Oberyn Martell drew his final breath in the sandy courtyard of King's Landing, except, to the astonishment of many, he did not die. The blow that shattered his jaw and nearly crushed his skull would have killed a lesser man outright, but Oberin, Prince of Dorne, had always been made of sterner stuff than most men expected. Pain rippled across his face, blood soaked into the scorched sand, and he heard, through the roar in his ears, the laughter of the monstrous Gregor Clegane. Somewhere beyond that laughter, the memory of Elia's voice called to him as though from across a windblown desert. The overwhelming injustice that had spurred him to risk everything for a confession from the mountain, that unrelenting thirst for vengeance, burned in him like the heat of a Dornish summer. The watchers in the stands thought him finished, his head half caved in, his life draining away, but Oberin's eyes, though rimmed with blood, still glimmered with defiance. When they carried his body away, no one expected him to survive the night. But Dorne's famed knowledge of poisons, potions, and the healing arts of the scorching south would come to him in the form of rushed messages and bribes. Unbeknownst to the court, the Red Viper's loyal paramours and sworn protectors spirited him into the shadows of the city. He was whisked away by night, cradled on a litter, his battered face hidden beneath cloaks of deep crimson, his pained groans muffled by those who would ensure the Lannisters had no reason to suspect his faint spark of life. The Red Viper had come to King's Landing to see justice done, and though he had lost the official trial by combat, fate had not quite abandoned him. In the cramped quarters of a hidden apartment by the Blackwater, a pair of learned healers, one of them an Essosi who once studied among the alchemists of Karth, worked upon Oberin for many long days. They used potent poultices that reeked of desert herbs, scorpion venom diluted to an infinitesimal measure, and the resilient tissues of the Dornishman's body. The wounds were terrible, fractures in his skull, in his jaw, damage to one eye. But Oberin clung to life like a snake grips its prey, refusing to succumb. Even in his fevered delirium, he spat Elia's name, cursed Tywin Lannister, and demanded the confession he had so nearly wrung from the mountain. For weeks, the city gossiped of his brutal end, of how Gregor Clegane had made a smear of the infamous Prince of Dorne. Whispers spread that Dornish eyes would turn to vengeance. The Lannisters, thinking Oberin dead, had him declared so. His body was said to have been collected and burned, as none cared to confront Prince Doran with the truth so quickly. Yet in the hidden depths of King's Landing, the spider of rumor wove a subtle thread. Varys, the master of whisperers, listened behind closed doors. A flicker of knowledge reached him. Oberyn Martell drew breath still. Perhaps one or two heard the rumor and disbelieved it, for it seemed impossible that a man so badly beaten could remain in the world. In the chaos that followed, Tyrion Lannister's arrest, Tywin's maneuvers, the swirl of intrigue that consumed the Red Keep, no one thought to look too closely at a half-dead man hidden away in the city's warrens. His convalescence was not a gentle thing. Oberyn slipped into unconsciousness for days at a time. His dreams were wild and savage, haunted by memories of Elia's laughter, of their daughters, of the parched red mountains of Dorne under an unforgiving sun. In delirium, he seemed to see the face of his brother, Doran, stoic behind a veil of regrets, as if reminding him of duty. And always, the looming shape of Gregor Clegane, that monstrous figure, overshadowed these nightmares. Sometimes Oberyn would babble, half-lucid, about the Lannisters, about poison, about the need to gather an army. I must make him say her name, he would rasp to the darkened rafters. I must. When consciousness returned properly, a full fortnight had passed since the trial by combat. Oberin's left eye remained swollen shut, his cheekbone pinned in place by a cunning splint that pressed gently against his temple. Long bandages and salves covered the jagged cut on his scalp, and his features looked half-ruined. The Red Viper had always been handsome, dangerously so, but now scars marred him. He opened his one good eye to see his faithful paramour, Ellaria Sand, who had risked herself staying in King's Landing longer than wise. Tears glistened on her cheeks the moment she realized Oberin was awake. He tried to speak, only to produce a breathless croak. Ellaria pressed a cup of water to his cracked lips. Then he drank, painful though it was, every gulp feeling like knives in his throat. He recalled the duel through flashes, the euphoria of besting the mountain, of humiliating him with skillful spearwork. Then the triumphant cry had turned to horror as Gregor pulled him down. It all ended in blackness. Gradually, Oberin understood the risk he remained in. If the Lannisters discovered he was alive, they would snuff out that life without mercy. He was a threat, a man who knew too much of Tywin's crimes, who had demanded the truth in a public spectacle. So he used that knowledge and his cunning to vanish. With the help of a few well-placed bribes, a cunning disguise, and the loyalty of those in Dorne's secret network, Oberin slipped away from King's Landing in the back of a merchant's wagon, accompanied by Ilaria and a retinue of only the most trusted swords. They traveled by night, avoiding major roads, slipping past Lannister patrols. The wound in Oberin's face continued to fester, and fevers rose and fell unpredictably. Ilaria worried for him daily, her devotion unbreakable even in the face of horror. They headed south, though not to Sunspear. Oberin guessed that if Tywin Lannister knew of his survival, the Old Lion would move swiftly to ensure Dorne's downfall by any means necessary. And if Doran Martell learned of what had occurred too soon, Oberin feared his brother would play the diplomatic game for the sake of the realm, or at least for the sake of Dorne's future. Oberin, half-mad with pain and vengeance, had no desire for half measures. He wanted to strike at the Lannisters, to bring them low in a wave of retribution. Yet the question of how raged in his mind, Dorne alone might stand against the Iron Throne, but only for a time. The Tyrells in the Reach had allied themselves with the Crown. The Crown had gold and resources. Alone, Dorne would not topple the might of House Lannister. One night, near the Blackwater Rush, as his wound throbbed under the patch they had fashioned for him, Oberyn heard the news. Robb Stark, the king in the north, had scored a string of victories against the Lannisters in the Riverlands. Tywin's attention was divided, the crown's power tested. Word had it that the young wolf had outmaneuvered entire Lannister hosts and, though his fortunes might have seemed uncertain to many, he remained undefeated in direct battle. The tale of his victories stirred something in Oberin's battered heart, an opportunity. The bitterness that tied House Martell to House Targaryen was still fresh in memory, and the Lannisters had always been a prime target for Dornish vengeance. Perhaps forging an alliance with the Stark boy would serve as the blade with which to cut out the heart of King's Landing's power. Still wounded, still choking on the bitterness of his near-death experience, Oberyn set his mind to forging something new. He needed a moment to gather his own men, to summon some measure of strength from Dorne without revealing his survival to the Watchers at Sunspear. So he and Ilaria traveled south, quietly, crossing the disputed border regions between the Stormlands and the Dornish Marches. They avoided major towns, slinking through goat paths and old smugglers' trails. Many a night, Oberyn woke drenched in sweat, the fiery throbbing of his half-crushed skull pounding as if the mountain's gauntlet was still pressing upon it. But his spirit, so fierce, refused to relent. Upon reaching a small fortress hidden deep in the Red Mountains, a place Oberyn had once used as a secret vantage point for his paramours and allies, he collapsed into the arms of men and women loyal to House Martell alone. The fortress was old and weather-worn, little more than a keep built of red rock, guarded by a handful of sworn soldiers who had known Oberyn for years. These men and women, uncertain how to react to the sight of the prince so battered, greeted him with horror and reverence. Whispers flew. The Red Viper has come back from death itself. Some said that if a man could cheat the mountain's final blow, then truly no mortal force would ever tame him. For 3 more weeks, Oberyn recovered. Medicines arrived, discreetly purchased from Volantene traders in the port of Planky Town. He regained strength in his body, though the excruciating ache in his face never fully departed. He insisted on training with a spear again as soon as he could stand upright. Even with the trembling weakness in his limbs, he forced himself to move, sweat pouring, teeth clenched. Ilaria pleaded with him not to push himself so hard, for fear he might exacerbate his injuries. But Oberyn only smiled. "I have no time for caution," he said, voice muffled a little by the damage to his jaw. "We must strike while the lion is distracted by the wolves. A viper cannot lie coiled forever." At last, word arrived that Tywin Lannister was embroiled in a contest of cunning in King's Landing, that Robb Stark held Riverrun, that the Riverlords flocked to the Direwolf banner. Another piece of news came, whispered from travelers. Walder Frey's alliance with the crown was tenuous, talk of a marriage pact broken, rumors of betrayal on the horizon. The realm was in turmoil. A single determined push might upset the balance enough to send the Lannisters' precarious hold on the throne toppling. So Oberyn made up his mind. He called upon those Dornish lords and knights whose loyalty was personal, or whose thirst for vengeance matched his own. He did not call openly upon Prince Doran, indeed he dared not, for he worried that Doran's cautious nature would see him recalled to Sunspear, forced to abide by safer politics. Oberyn wanted retribution, wanted to punish House Lannister and break its power. He wanted to see Tywin kneel. Let the realm talk of reckless ambition. The Red Viper knew the taste of death and had returned wanting nothing but the sweet fruit of payback. A small but capable force assembled at the hidden fortress in the mountains. Perhaps 400 men arrived in secret, sworn swords from houses that owed Oberyn personal loyalty, or young knights enthralled by the legend of the Red Viper. Some were men who had fought in border skirmishes with the Reach, some who had smuggled contraband over the marches. All were tough and cunning, well suited to the guerrilla tactics Oberyn had in mind. Among them were the Sand Snakes, his daughters, each with their own fierce skill and unwavering devotion to their father. Tyene came with her knowledge of poisons, Nymeria with her grace and whips, Obara with her relentless thirst for battle. Even the younger ones, Sarella and Elia Sand, had found ways to make themselves useful in infiltration and cunning. Ilaria, though no warrior, refused to remain behind. She believed that her presence might help Oberyn maintain the sense of family that anchored him. Then, in the hush of a starlit night, they set forth. Oberyn, swathed in desert robes, rode with the party, his face still partially bandaged. They traversed the rugged passes, crossing into the Reach where they expected to skirt beneath the noses of Tyrell patrols. For Oberyn had gleaned that the Tyrells might be occupied with the royal wedding preparations. Margaery Tyrell was to wed King Tommen soon, or so rumor said. Far from the wide highways, the small Dornish force slipped across. Their aim was the Riverlands, to seek out the king in the north. The journey was arduous. They rode through muddy roads across farmland ravaged by the passing armies. It seemed as if the war had scorched the very soul of the countryside, leaving small folk cowering behind broken fences, their fields pillaged. Raiding parties roamed the land, some sworn to the Lannisters, others to no one at all. Half-starved men with old swords took what they wanted. More than once, Oberyn's force had to clash with these brigands. The Dornishmen fought with lethal elegance, dispatching the attackers with whistling spear thrusts or the crack of whips. After each such encounter, Oberyn's rage flared. He saw in the suffering of these war-torn lands the reflection of what the crown had visited upon Elia Martell. He thought of how the mountain was free to roam, still alive, a monstrous hulk, though presumably left reeling from poison. Rumors claimed Gregor Clegane was dying of the Red Viper's lethal venom, that the Lannisters had locked him away with the royal maesters. The thought made Oberyn's lips curl into a sardonic grin, though it pained his battered jaw. If the mountain's every breath was agony, so much the better. Eventually, they reached the outskirts of Riverrun's domains. Robb Stark was said to be at the ancestral castle of House Tully, the seat of Catelyn Stark's birth. Scouts from Oberyn's band confirmed the presence of the northern host. Banners bearing the dire wolf fluttered over tent encampments. The Dornish party halted a day's ride away, for to approach unannounced might spark a violent reaction. Oberyn sent word carefully via a letter addressed to Robb Stark himself. He included enough details to prove that the writer was truly Oberyn Martell, Prince of Dorne, once believed dead. He offered parley, an alliance perhaps, speaking only vaguely so as not to give away too much. The message concluded with a personal vow: "The Lannisters have much to answer for, your grace. I would see them pay." The reply came swiftly. Robb Stark's outriders found the Dornish camp without difficulty, though they approached with caution. The Northmen who arrived wore stark expressions, uncertain how to greet these Southerners said to be led by a dead man. Oberyn emerged from his tent, clad in light leather armor that revealed the tan of his exposed arms. The side of his face still bore savage scars, and he wore a patch over the eye that had been most severely injured. The effect was striking, the Red Viper, half phantom, half legend, standing in the flickering torchlight. Wordless, the Northmen offered him a sealed parchment. Oberyn read it by the light of a brazier. Robb Stark invited him to Riverrun under a banner of peace to discuss terms. Oberyn's good eye slid across the words, a spark of triumph in it. At last, a chance to rally more than just a handful of spears against the Lannisters. He nodded, turning to Ilaria, who stood at his side in quiet support. "The wolf would speak with the viper," he murmured. "Let us see if he has the bite to match the bark." They arrived at Riverrun near dusk the next day. The castle's drawbridge opened with caution, the portcullis lifted slowly, but the king in the north stood at the gatehouse to greet them. Tall, young, bearing the burdens of war in the tightness around his eyes, Robb Stark surveyed the Dornish visitors with a mixture of curiosity and guarded respect. At his side stood a handful of northern lords, Rickon Stark's surviving son Haryon, the great Jon Umber, and others whose gazes flicked over Oberin as if expecting a ghost. Oberin dismounted and knelt briefly, but then stood, offering Robb the courtesy due a king, yet also revealing that he did not see himself as subservient. "Your Grace," he said, his voice sharper than it had been weeks ago, though still laced with an edge of pain. "We have come a long way from the deserts of Dorne to join our cause with yours, if you will have it." Robb inclined his head. "Prince Oberin," he replied, "I must confess, I heard you had fallen in King's Landing." A raspy chuckle escaped Oberin's throat. "The mountain thought the same, I suspect. But the gods were not finished with me yet. And as long as I draw breath, I will see House Lannister brought to its knees." A flicker of intrigue passed through Robb's expression. "Then we share a common purpose. My father was executed by that false king. My sisters remain in Lannister hands. Vengeance is not the only cause I fight for, but I will not deny it's part of it." They spoke then in Riverrun's great hall, while Oberin's retinue waited in the outer wards. Robb's mother, Lady Catelyn, was present, regarding Oberin with a mix of sympathy and scrutiny. The hall's torches lit Oberin's scarred visage. He did not speak gently. He never had been one for soft words. He spoke of justice, of a blow so fierce it would unseat the Lannisters from the Iron Throne. He proposed that Dorne could rally thousands of spears if Prince Doran were persuaded to give his blessing. For now, Oberin offered the forces he had at his immediate command, with more to come if they could orchestrate a safe route for additional Dornish troops. Robb listened. The northern lords shifted in their seats, suspicious perhaps of a Martell who appeared like an avenging spirit. Lady Catelyn asked pointed questions about Dorne's readiness to defy the Iron Throne, about whether Oberin had the authority to pledge such support. Oberin gave her the frankest answer he could. "My brother, Prince Doran, may or may not openly send the armies of Dorne, but he will not openly fight me either. The people of Dorne want justice. So do I. All I ask is that you allow me and mine to stand alongside you. I can promise you that the sands of Dorne are restless, and once the Lannisters discover I live, they will be forced to look south as well as north. That alone may divide their forces." Robb leaned back, his jaw tense. He was a young man, but he had learned the hardness of command. "You are proposing an alliance that might bring open war between the Seven Kingdoms and Dorne. You suggest we force them to spread their troops even thinner. A cunning plan, but dangerous." Oberin's grin, though twisted by scars, was genuine. "Dangerous is often what the times require, Your Grace. The realm is already at war. Tywin Lannister sits the throne through fear and gold. Let him face rebellion from the south, from the north, from the storms, from all corners. Let us see how long he can hold it all together." Over the course of 2 days, negotiations continued. The great Jon Umber roared approval of any plan to kill Lannisters. Lady Catelyn worried about the repercussions. Would bringing Dorne into the war open the possibility of a broad southern invasion if things went ill? But Oberin argued passionately that the men of Dorne would never bow to the Lannisters, even if forced to remain neutral by Doran's caution. Providing them a chance to join openly with the North might tip the scales. Finally, Robb agreed. A subtle arrangement was reached. Oberin and his 400 Dornish warriors would integrate with the northern host for the time being. Quiet messages would be sent south through trusted envoys to gauge the willingness of Dorne's lesser lords to raise their banners. Robb would treat Oberin as an honored ally, and in exchange, Oberin pledged to fight under the Stark banner so long as the cause was to dethrone the Lannisters and secure justice for Elia Martell, Ned Stark, and all the others who had suffered. No grand ceremony announced the alliance, for secrecy was critical. But on the ramparts of Riverrun, Robb and Oberin clasped arms, each man seeing in the other the reflection of a fierce vow. The king in the north, a youth with a wolf's cunning. The red viper of Dor. Any, a wounded snake bent on vengeance. Together, they set themselves against the Iron Throne. The next week saw Oberin and his companions learning the ways of the northern army. The Dornish, accustomed to heat and dryness, found the rains of the Riverlands oppressive. The Northmen looked upon them warily at first. Old prejudices and legends abounded. But over nightly fires, after cups of sour ale and shared stories of battles, a measure of camaraderie developed. The Dornish swiftness in skirmishes proved invaluable, as did their skill with poisons. Tyenne's careful concoctions ensured that any arrow or blade from their side left a mark that would not be healed easily by Lannister maesters. Oberyn himself tried to train daily, pushing through the pain in his face. He learned to fight with limited depth perception, compensating for the patch over his ruined eye. Though not as quick as before, his cunning was undiminished. His daughters took part in drills with the Northmen, stunning them with their agility. One night, Obara challenged 3 of Robb's top swordsmen in turn and put each on his back. The great John guffawed and proclaimed he had never seen such boldness in a woman. Oberin, for his part, wore a grin as proud as any father's. Slowly, he got to know the king in the north as more than a name. Robb Stark was driven by a sense of duty, loyalty, and also the heartbreak of losing his father. He was not naive, but he carried an earnestness that Oberin found surprising in a warlord. Lady Catelyn, for her part, approached Oberin carefully, as if uncertain how to handle a viper in her midst. But she never forgot the courtesy that Tully tradition demanded. Oberin could see in her eyes a mother's pain, reminiscent of his own sense of familial anger. He came to respect her counsel, for she spoke frankly of alliances and of the precarious situation with Walder Frey. Indeed, House Frey loomed as a potential threat or ally. Oberin pressed Robb to keep them on side, if only for the strategic crossing at the Twins. The uneasy arrangement forced Robb to consider a marriage alliance for himself or for one of his lords. But fate moved quickly. News came that a great blow had been dealt to the Lannisters on the battlefield, that the roads to the west lay open for the Northmen to strike at Casterly Rock if they dared. Yet also word arrived that Tywin was rallying new levies, forging an alliance with the Tyrells, marshalling a force large enough to break the northern line. While tension hung in the air, Oberin recognized an opening. If the combined forces of Dorne and the North marched together, perhaps they could bring the war to the Lannisters' doorstep. The trouble lay in uniting them. The bulk of Dorne's forces remained in the south under Prince Doran's control. Oberin wrote letters urging Doran to commit, but the replies came back measured and vague. Doran spoke of needing time to gauge the political winds, of not wanting to risk Dorne on a reckless gambit. It incensed Oberin, who raged in private, half wishing to march south with all the men he could muster and force Doran's hand. But he knew that fracturing House Martell would be a disaster. Robb, for his part, reminded Oberin that an alliance with the Stormlands might give them a corridor to connect with the Dornish. But Stannis Baratheon had claimed Dragonstone and was embroiled in his own struggles, warring with his brother Renly's remaining forces, who had now mostly turned Tyrell. The politics were tangled. Oberin's solution was straightforward. They must strike a blow so devastating that the realm would see Tywin for the tyrant he was. Only then would others flock to their cause. They decided to test their combined might. The chance came sooner than expected. Scouts reported a Lannister column moving through the Riverlands, commanded by Ser Adam Marbrand, attempting to link up with reinforcements from the Westerlands. If that column joined the main Lannister force, the North would face a more formidable enemy. Robb mobilized his host, and Oberin's Dornish troops readied themselves. Under starlight they marched. The rain battered them intermittently, making the roads muddy. The nights were chill and damp, quite unlike the dryness of Dorne. Yet Oberin pressed on, ignoring the ache in his skull and the twinges in his jaw. When they reached the area near Oxcross, they employed a tactic Robb had used before: stealth and sudden fury. It was a near repeat of the cunning that had allowed Robb to surprise Jaime Lannister's forces. Only now, Oberin and his men added a southern twist. In the dead of night, Dornish scouts scaled rocky slopes and poured poison into the water supply the Lannisters had begun to use. Meanwhile, the main northern force set an ambush. As dawn broke, weakened by thirst and the mild toxins that sapped their strength, the Lannisters found themselves beset on all sides. Spear points flashed in the early light, northern war cries echoed, and Dornish whips cracked across the dusty air. Robb, astride his great grey dire wolf banner, led the cavalry charge. His personal guard rode in with savage speed, but it was the Dornish infiltration that drove confusion deep into the Lannister ranks. Some men reeled from sudden illness, others turned to face the new threat only to be surrounded by northern spearmen. Oberin fought in the thick of it, his spear stabbing with deadly precision. Though half his vision was gone, he possessed an uncanny sense of distance and footwork. Even the dull throbbing in his skull felt like a war drum urging him forward. The battle raged for an hour at most, but it proved decisive. Ser Adam Marbrand tried to rally, but the quick strikes from Dornish outriders and the relentless pressure from northern cavalry left his lines collapsed. Survivors scrambled to flee only to be run down or captured. By midday, the battlefield belonged to Robb Stark. Corpses of Lannister men littered the ground. When the dust settled, Oberyn stood near Robb, the two gazing upon the carnage. The victory was resounding, akin to the feats that had earned Robb his reputation as the Young Wolf. Their combined forces had won a powerful advantage. Oberyn's heart pounded with satisfaction, a step closer to the vengeance he sought. For every Lannister banner trampled, every rumor that would spread of Dorne's involvement, Tywin would feel pressure mounting. That knowledge was a balm on Oberyn's old wounds, if only for a moment. The aftermath saw the forging of respect between the two armies. Northern men recognized the ferocity and cunning of the Dornish. Their prejudices faded in the face of shared success. Oberyn, battered though he was, commanded authority through presence alone, reminding them all that the Red Viper was very much alive and lethal. But with victory came new complications. Word of this joint victory would inevitably reach King's Landing. Tywin Lannister would realize that Oberyn Martell lived. He would suspect Dorne's covert involvement, even if Prince Doran maintained an official stance of neutrality. Swiftly, the war escalated. Lannister agents attempted to bribe or threaten certain Dornish border lords. The Crown declared that Oberyn Martell was an outlaw, that Dorne must disavow him or face repercussions. In Sunspear, Doran received stiffly worded raven scrolls demanding he turn over his brother to the Crown's justice. Doran bided his time, sending politely worded replies without revealing his hand. Even so, small skirmishes began to break out in the Dornish marches as local lords, uncertain of their prince's stance, turned on one another. Meanwhile, the northern host advanced further west, capturing key roads. Oberyn rode at Robb's side, discussing where best to strike next. They argued about whether to push for Casterly Rock or attempt to relieve the Riverlands from further Lannister raids. Lady Catelyn favored sending an emissary to the Vale, seeking to involve Lysa Arryn. Oberyn scoffed privately. Lysa was known to be a timid creature holed up in her mountain fastness. But he recognized the strategic value. The realm was a patchwork of alliances and grudges. Each corner might hold the key to toppling the crown. Yet in the midst of these deliberations, a raven arrived with dire news. Walder Frey had extended an invitation to Robb Stark. A wedding, it was said, to rectify old slights and restore the alliance between House Stark and House Frey. Catelyn's eyes darkened. She mistrusted Walder Frey's intentions, but saw little choice. The letter implied that refusing the invitation could mean the Freys would bar passage at the Twins, effectively isolating the Northern army from returning home if need be. A precarious trap was being laid, though not one easily avoided. Oberyn, hearing the details, felt suspicion coil in his gut. The Freys were a cunning lot, proud, easily offended, and not exactly brimming with honor. He pressed Robb to be cautious. If you were to cross that cursed bridge, do so with enough men to defend yourself 10 times over, he advised. Bring the great Jon. Bring your fiercest. And perhaps allow me and my spear to stand watch. Robb nodded, but the burden weighed upon him. On one side, he needed the Freys. On the other, he knew Walder Frey's reputation. Lady Catelyn insisted that it would be best if Robb made every possible courtesy for the sake of preserving the alliance. We cannot afford to make another enemy, she said, her voice tight. And so it came to pass that the northern host and its Dornish allies prepared to attend a wedding at the Twins. Robb hoped to secure Walder Frey's continued support or at least neutrality. The plan was to keep the main body of the army outside the Frylands, while a select party joined Robb in crossing the Green Fork to the castle. Oberyn insisted upon joining him, suspecting every shadow of betrayal. The memory of Tywin Lannister's cunning weighed upon him. He had little doubt the man had ears everywhere. They reached the Twins under a gray sky. Rain drizzled over the broad river, the fortress looking dour and unwelcoming. Walder Frey greeted them with a semblance of courtesy, though Oberyn found the old man's watery eyes unnerving. Frey's brood of children and grandchildren filled the halls, each giving perfunctory bows to the king in the north. Robb offered apologies for previous slights, compliments to Walder Frey's house, the usual platitudes. Oberyn stood at his side, wearing a cloak embroidered with the sun and spear of House Martell, to underline that this was a new alliance with potential for wide consequences. The wedding commenced in the castle's great hall. Tension hung thick. The smell of roasted meat, wine, and damp wool mingled in the air. Musicians played jarring notes, and the bride, one of Frey's many daughters, looked frightened rather than joyful. Robb did his best to maintain a polite facade, conversing with Walder Frey while also keeping a watchful eye on the arrangement of the hall. Oberyn stood near a pillar, scanning every face, suspecting that something dark lurked behind the forced smiles. Then came the moment that shifted the realm's fate irrevocably. The doors slammed shut. The musicians shifted their tune to a dirge. And Walder Frey rose, a mocking grin on his withered face. "Your Grace," he said, addressing Robb with mocking politeness, "it is time we pay our respects properly." Knives flashed from beneath tables. Crossbows appeared on the balconies. Oberin's good eye widened. He recognized a betrayal in an instant, and his body reacted on instinct. He shouted in alarm, lunging to intercept an attacker who rushed at Robb. But crossbow bolts whistled across the hall. A northern bannerman fell, then another. Screams erupted. The dreaded Red Wedding had begun. Chaos enveloped the hall. Walder Frey's men swarmed in from hidden passages. The northern retinue, taken by surprise, tried to draw steel but found themselves outnumbered and enclosed. Bolts slammed into chests and backs. Blood spattered the rushes. Women shrieked, men roared. Somewhere, Lady Catelyn cried out for Robb. Oberin felt a sudden jolt in his side. A crossbow bolt buried itself in his leather armor, the tip scraping flesh. He hissed in pain, spinning to drive his spear into a Frey soldier's throat. The man collapsed, gurgling. More crossbow bolts thumped into the wooden columns. Oberin dropped low, scanning frantically for Robb Stark. He glimpsed him near the dais, pinned by men with swords. Another volley sword. One bolt struck Robb in the chest, staggering him. A red mist of fury descended over Oberin's senses. Betrayal again. Death again. The cunning illusions of alliance shattered. The Lannisters had arranged this, he had no doubt, with Walder Frey's compliance. He saw the old weasel cackling from the high seat, safe behind his guards. Oberin lunged forward, ignoring the pain in his own body, trying to hack a path to Robb. Distantly, he heard Lady Catelyn scream. He saw the great John bellowing a war cry, hacking at Frey men, only to vanish beneath the crush of assailants. Then Oberin's gaze locked on a group of Frey crossbowmen taking aim at Robb, who struggled to stand despite the bolt lodged in his side. Time seemed to slow. Oberin hurled his spear. It struck one crossbowman in the chest, impaling him. Then Oberin leaped forward, seizing a fallen sword from a dead Northman. With a primal roar, he slashed at the nearest Frey, left the man bleeding, kicked another in the stomach. A fleeting hope seized him. If he could just reach Robb in time, perhaps they could fight free. But more Freys poured in. Robb was on one knee now, blood speckling his lips. Oberin's blade flashed. He fought like a cornered viper, each strike lethal, but the tide of enemies pressed in. Another bolt scraped across Oberin's shoulder, drawing a ragged cry from his lips. He stumbled, regaining his footing only by sheer will. From the corner of his eye, he saw Walder Frey grin triumphantly. Robb forced himself upright, even with blood coursing from his wound. "Grey Wind," he cried, as if calling for his dire wolf, but the beast was outside in the kennels, presumably ambushed too. Frey men closed in. One stabbed Robb in the stomach. He groaned, doubling over. Catelyn's scream echoed again, a raw sound of despair. She seized a Frey girl, pressing a dagger to her throat, but Walder Frey only sneered. Oberin, desperation fueling him, hacked a path through three men. He reached Robb's side just as the king in the north collapsed. Oberin caught him, tried to lift him, but more men rushed forward. They battered Oberin with maces and clubs, driving him back. He realized with a sinking horror that they were doomed. Then his gaze flicked up, catching Walder Frey's hateful sneer, and in that moment, Oberin swore that if he lived, he would turn this castle to rubble. A crossbow bolt punched through Robb's back. His eyes went wide. Oberin gripped him, tried to fight off the men with his free arm, but a savage blow to Oberin's wrist forced the sword from his hand. Another blow found his thigh. He crumpled, still trying to shield Robb with his body. A hush fell over the hall, broken only by ragged breathing, moans of the dying, and the mocking notes of the musicians. Walder Frey watched from the dais, bored now that the slaughter was almost done. Lady Catelyn held the Frey girl at dagger point, tears streaming down her face. She screamed, "Let him go, or I'll cut her throat." Walder Frey shrugged. Robb coughed blood. Oberin, panting, felt darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. He pulled himself partially upright, ignoring the agony in his leg, wanting to at least see the end. He beheld the crossbowmen leveling their weapons, the Frey soldiers brandishing swords slick with red. Lady Catelyn stared in horror as Lord Frey turned his back on her. She slashed her hostage's throat in desperation, a final gesture of defiance, but a moment later one of Frey's men slit Catelyn's throat. Her body sagged to the floor, blood pouring. Robb's eyes closed. Oberin felt a wrenching heartbreak. This boy king, so full of promise, undone by treachery. Oberin tried to move, to fight, to slash at anything. But he was pinned down by guards who ripped him away from Robb's corpse. The last sight he had of the king in the north was his lifeless form, crossbow bolts protruding from his chest. Men barked orders. Oberin felt rough hands stripping him of his armor, binding his wrists. He spat blood, cursing them all. "Fry scum," he croaked, voice ragged. They hoisted him upright. Walder Fry approached slowly, eyeing him with a mixture of amusement and mild curiosity. "So the Red Viper does live," Fry said, lips twisting into a sneer. "I heard rumor you'd cheated the grave." Tywin said I might expect a surprise guest. Oberin spat in his direction, though blood flecked his lips. "Filthy coward. May the seven damn you." Walder Fry snorted. "Look around you, Prince. You're finished. Your king in the north is dead. Your men are scattered. The crown will pay me handsomely for delivering you to them. I imagine Tywin Lannister will want to see you. I hear he's got a special place in King's Landing for traitors." With a trembling breath, Oberin mustered one last curse. You will regret this. Even if you kill me, Dorne will burn you for what you've done." Fry laughed, a wet hacking sound. "Dorne? Seems to me your brother doesn't want to openly defy the crown. He'll keep quiet. If he tries anything, we'll smash him like we smashed you." He nodded to his men. "Take him away. Put him in irons. If he struggles, take off his head." They dragged Oberin through the hall, past the corpses of men he had fought beside. The metallic stench of blood was thick. He called out for Ilaria, for his daughters, but there was no sign of them among the carnage. His heart seized with terror. Had they been among the few forced to wait outside? Had they been slaughtered? Or had they escaped? He did not know. Darkness threatened to claim him as he lost more blood from his wounds. He stumbled, nearly collapsed. But he would not die here, not if the gods had any sense of justice. He refused to close his eye, refused to fade. The memory of Elia spurred him, the recollection of Ilaria's face, the vow of vengeance. He might have failed to save Robb Stark, but perhaps he could yet cheat death a second time. If he escaped, he could rally what was left of the North, or Dorne, someone, anyone, to bring down these traitors. The last coherent thought that burned in his mind was a vow: the Freys would pay, the Lannisters would pay. In the courtyard, the Frey soldiers shoved him to his knees. Rain spattered the cobblestones. A few Northmen corpses lay strewn about, their limbs stiff in death. Oberin's breathing was ragged. More men approached, carrying orders from Walder Frey. "We're to send him to King's Landing," one said, prodding Oberin with a boot. "See if the crown wants him in chains or as a head in a box." His head lolled, consciousness slipping. He clenched his fists. Could this truly be his fate again, at the mercy of House Lannister? The very thought made him choke on fury. The scabs of his old wounds seethed, and he was certain he must look half a corpse. His mind spun with the horror of the Red Wedding. Suddenly, a horn call sounded beyond the gates, echoing across the drizzle. Confusion rippled through the Freys. Shouts came from the battlements. Riders approaching. They bear the sun and spear? The direwolf. Oberin's heart kicked in his chest. Perhaps, in some twist of fate, the remnants of his Dornish contingent or the northern outriders had realized the trap and stormed the castle. The Freys cursed, forming ranks, dragging Oberin toward a side tower. Crossbows were raised. The tension was thick, but there was no immediate assault. Instead, the horns blew again, a frantic warning. He heard steel clashing outside. Hoofbeats rang on stone. Then something that sounded like thunder tore through the air. The Freys braced themselves at the gate, confusion and panic in their voices. Oberin felt rough hands pull him into a side corridor. Freed from the open air, he was forced along the corridor's length, the flickering torches casting wild shadows. He told himself to fight, but his body felt like lead. Wounds throbbed and the world blurred with each heartbeat. Still, he tried to gather his strength. Just then, one of the Frey guards parted from the group to check behind them, and in that split second, another guard turned his head at a noise outside. Oberin saw an opening, took a desperate chance. He wrenched free, slamming his bound hands into a guard's chin. The guard reeled, dropping his sword. Oberin grabbed for it, though his hands were still shackled. His half-numb fingers closed around the hilt. Another guard swung a mace at him. Oberin ducked, pain ripping through his side. He swung blindly, slicing the guard's leg. The man howled, staggering. Shouts echoed. Another crossbowman tried to aim, but in the cramped corridor, it was difficult. Oberin rammed him with a shoulder. A bolt fired wildly, clattering off stone. In a frenzy, Oberin slashed left and right. His vision blurred from blood loss, but some savage impetus kept him on his feet. He cut down one guard, then lurched forward to the next. Soon, those that remained alive had fled deeper into the keep or back outside. Leaning against the corridor wall, Oberin panted. He needed to remove these chains. But he heard the chaos all around. He needed to escape, find his daughters if they were alive, find Ilaria if she, too, had survived. Gritting his teeth, he stumbled forward, searching for an exit. Blood dribbled from the bolt wound in his thigh, each step a fresh agony. He came across a storeroom. There, a battered old table with tools was strewn about. Gasping, he rummaged for anything to pry his shackles open. A short dagger with a chipped tip offered some hope. He braced it in the lock. It took multiple tries, his hands trembled, and the corridor outside was lit with flickering torchlight, revealing the bodies of 2 fry men he had slain. At last, a click. The shackle on his right wrist sprang open. He nearly dropped the dagger but forced his numb fingers to keep hold, repeating the process for the left wrist. Then, with a ragged breath of triumph, he was free. But not safe. The castle rang with alarm. The horn calls outside continued, and the clang of steel told him battle was raging. With his arms free, he managed to tear strips of cloth from a fallen Frey's tunic, binding his bleeding leg as best he could. He took a moment to gather himself, leaning heavily on the storeroom's table. A memory of Robb Stark, stabbed and gasping, flashed in his mind. Lady Catelyn's final scream. Bitter grief churned in his gut. So much lost, so much undone in a single night of treachery. He would never forget this. If he survived, the name Frey would be cursed in Dorne for generations. Stabbing pain forced him to keep moving. He retrieved a short sword from the floor and moved back into the corridor. His footsteps echoed. Around a corner, he found a Frey guard, dead from a slash across the neck, but not by Oberin's hand. It seemed someone else had passed this way. Possibly a Northman or a Dornish soldier. Grimly, Oberin pressed on, following the trail of conflict. He reached a courtyard with a postern gate. The heavy door stood ajar, the cobblestones slick with blood and rain. A handful of corpses, both Northern and Frey, lay heaped around. Flickers of lightning illuminated the scene. Then Oberin saw 3 riders gallop in through the open gate. One carried a battered Northern banner, the direwolf drooping in the downpour. Another wore a tattered Dornish cloak. Oberin recognized him, a man named Kyle of House Santagar. Relief flared. Perhaps not all his men had been caught in the trap. Spotting Oberin, Kyle shouted, "Prince Oberin! Thank the gods, you live." The riders dismounted, rushing over to support him as he nearly collapsed. Another Dornish soldier, Heron, helped Oberin stay upright. "We thought you lost, my prince," Heron said, breathless. "We realized something was wrong." Frey's locked down the gates. The music changed, so we rallied what men we could. We've been fighting to break in and save who we can. Oberin sagged against them, relief and sorrow mingling. "It's a slaughter," he rasped. "Robb, he's gone. Frey treachery." Kyle's eyes flashed with fury. "We have to get you out. There are too many of them." The main host was too far to intervene in time. "We're outnumbered." Oberin recognized the grim truth in his words. This was not a battle they could win now. Perhaps a handful of survivors could escape. "My daughters." "Ilaria," he demanded. Kyle shook his head. "We saw Obara and Nymeria outside the hall, but they were separated from us in the chaos. They fought a path through the courtyard. I don't know if they got out." Despair gripped Oberin, but he forced himself to remain lucid. "We must gather who we can. There's no time." Voices and footfalls approached from behind. Frey men, presumably. Oberin gestured. "We have to go now." Supported by the 2 Dornishmen, Oberin hobbled out the postern gate. Rain pelted them. In the darkness beyond the castle walls, shapes ran to and fro, some fleeing, some fighting. The chill wind cut through Oberin's soaked tunic. He glimpsed a knot of Northmen fending off crossbow bolts, though it was impossible to tell who commanded them. The moans of the dying rose into the stormy sky. Guided by Kyle and Heron, Oberin mounted a horse, though each movement made his legs scream in protest. They rode away from the fortress, leaving the carnage behind. A handful of other riders followed, a ragged group of Northmen, 2 or 3 more Dornish. The night swallowed them. They did not stop until the faint glow of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Rain had eased, leaving the ground a sodden morass. The survivors found shelter in a stand of twisted oaks. Oberin, dizzy from blood loss, slid off his horse with help. The men made a crude camp, lighting a small fire that they tried to shield from prying eyes. Over the next hours, more riders filtered in, 3 of Oberin's sand snakes among them. Nymeria, Tyen, and Obara arrived together, battered and shaken but alive. Ilaria was not with them. Nor were Sarella or Eliasand, the younger ones. Oberin's heart clenched at the news. Obara, caked in mud and drying blood, said they had been forced to split up in the chaos. She believed Ilaria had fled with some other Dornish women through another route, possibly out of the castle altogether. They could only pray she had escaped. Oberin, barely able to keep his eye open, sank into a grief-laden silence, the flicker of the fire dancing on his battered face. The day that followed was grim. They waited, hoping more survivors might find them. A few did, but not many. The scale of the betrayal was too great. The Red Wedding had become a byword for slaughter. Robb Stark was confirmed dead, as was Lady Catelyn. The northern cause seemed mortally wounded. Some among the Northmen raged for vengeance, others sank into despair. Oberin understood their pain more than they knew. Exhausted, half-dead from his injuries, the Red Viper gathered what remained of his Dornish party. Counting them, he found a mere fraction remained, 200 at most, scattered across the region. A handful of Northmen looked to him now, for Robb was gone, the cause in shambles. They wanted direction. Some asked if Oberin would lead them north to regroup or south to Dorne to muster a new army. In the quiet hush of that sorrowful dawn, Oberin spoke, his voice hoarse but laced with unwavering fury. This night has shown us what monsters the Freys are, how cunning the Lannisters' hand is. Robb Stark is slain, but the North's spirit endures. Dorne's vengeance still burns. We must not let this darkness snuff out our fire. We will rally, if not with the full might of the North, then with those who remain loyal. If not with the entire might of Dorne, then with all who still believe in justice. The Freys will pay. The Lannisters will pay. House Martell does not forget, and neither do the wolves of the North. Some men, fatigued and fearful, only half listened. Others nodded gravely. The seeds of revenge were planted that night, watered with blood. Oberin, with one eye swollen shut and his leg bound in filthy bandages, found himself the reluctant figure at the center of a new cause. He had survived the mountain. Now he had survived the Freys' treachery. A lesser man might have succumbed to despair, but Oberin's heart was too full of hate, of vengeance, of unquenchable will. In the days that followed, the survivors moved northward in small groups, traveling by secret routes. They aimed to pass the neck to seek refuge with those Northmen who had not been present at the wedding. Word of the massacre spread like wildfire across the realm. House Bolton, it was said, had colluded with the Freys, obtaining some vile arrangement with Tywin Lannister. The king in the north was dead, and the Lannisters had effectively broken the Northern Rebellion. Or so the rest of Westeros believed. Within that rumor, Oberin seized an opportunity. Let the realm think the north was finished, that the Dornish had retreated. Let them think House Bolton's new claim as Warden of the North bestowed by the Lannisters would ensure peace. Meanwhile, Oberin would gather the scattered loyalists, coordinate with any who refused to bow to the Boltons, and perhaps, just perhaps, strike at the Lannisters in a way they would never see coming. But that was a dream for the future. The present was bleak. Each day, Oberin's ragged band risked ambush by Frey or Bolton patrols. The rivers and roads were guarded. They were forced to move at night, crossing swamps and bogs. Each step taxed Oberin's battered body further. Tywin tried to tend his wounds, employing her knowledge of herbs to stave off infection. But Oberin's fever returned, the old head wound throbbing as if the mountain's gauntlet had come crashing down once more. He pushed onward, unwilling to break. Eventually, they reached a hidden camp in the outskirts of the Neck near Moat Cailin. There, a band of crannogmen loyal to House Reed gave them shelter. Oberin, pale and weak, was carried into a hut built upon stilts, safe among the marshes. The crannogmen, famously elusive and protective, recognized the dire wolf sigil worn by some of the Northmen survivors. They offered a measure of hospitality, though they eyed Oberyn Martell with caution. In that stilt hut, Oberin fought for his life again. Fever raged, and he drifted in and out of delirium. The memory of Illyria's face haunted him. He had no idea if she was alive, lost, or worse. He clung to the thought that if she were gone, he would have felt the finality in his heart. She must be out there, just as he was. The sand snakes huddled around him, helpless as their father tossed and turned, cursing the Freys, the Boltons, Tywin Lannister, the gods themselves. After days of near madness, he emerged from the fever's grip. Weak, but breathing. The crannogmen spoke quietly of a path north that could lead them to loyal hill clans near the mountains or even to White Harbor, where House Manderley might still harbor loyalty to the Starks. A glimmer of hope flickered. If the North was to rise again, it would need leaders, though who remained from the Stark line. Rumor said Bran and Rickon were dead, Theon Greyjoy had taken Winterfell, and Sansa was a captive in King's Landing. Some whispered that Jon Snow was at the Wall, but the Night's Watch was sworn to neutrality. The future for the North seemed precarious indeed. Yet Oberin refused to yield. The monstrous betrayal at the twins only hardened his resolve. He resolved to do what he had set out to do, bring down the Lannisters. If that meant forging a new alliance, so be it. If that meant rallying the North under a different banner, House Reed, House Manderley, or another and persuading them that vengeance was worth pursuing, he would. If that meant returning to Dorne in time to shame Prince Doran into open war, so be it. He summoned his sand snakes, the remaining Dornish knights, and those Northmen who had nowhere else to turn. Their band was small, battered, but not yet broken. "The Lannisters think they have won," Oberin said, voice low yet seething with intensity. "They believe the North is shattered and that Dorne will remain quiet. We will prove them wrong." Nymeria asked, "How, father?" "We're few and the North is under Bolton control." Oberin's good eye gleamed. "We'll move as serpents do, striking where they least expect. We'll find the pockets of resistance that remain. And we'll send word to Dorne, not to my brother directly, but to those lords who hunger for justice. We'll gather enough to be a thorn in the lion's paw, to bleed it day by day until it roars in agony." Tywin frowned. "But can we truly unify them without Prince Doran?" Oberin exhaled. "Perhaps not all of them, but we only need enough. Doran will not openly oppose me, though he might not support me either. In time, once the realm sees that the Lannisters can be defied, once we prove they are not invincible, Doran may see that it's safe to come out of the shadows." He looked at the Northmen gathered there, haggard men who had lost their king, their lords, and their kin. "We will need your help," he said. "To navigate these lands, to locate safe houses, to contact the hidden loyalists. We must do more than avenge Robb Stark. We must ensure that the North is not lost to the Boltons' tyranny." A tall, lean warrior named Galbart Glover nodded, tears in his eyes. "We do this for the memory of the king in the North. He saved my castle once. I'll stand with you, Prince Oberin, if you mean to keep fighting." With that vow, the seeds of a new defiance were planted in the bogs of the neck. Oberin's party spent weeks there, recovering, building alliances with the Crannogmen under Howland Reed's watchful eye. Whispers spread quietly of a southern prince forging an outlaw band in the swamps, aided by the cunning of the Reeds. Small groups of survivors trickled in. Among them, a battered soldier who had seen Ilaria slip away with a handful of Dornish. She was alive, if the tales were true, possibly heading east in search of safety. Oberin clung to that rumor like a drowning man to driftwood. Meanwhile, the realm reeled from the news of the Red Wedding. Tywin Lannister gloried in his victory, the gossip said, feasting on the final destruction of the Stark cause. Bolton and Frey agents roamed the north, subduing the last pockets of resistance. Dorne seethed with rumors that the Red Viper yet lived, that the Lannisters had orchestrated a slaughter at a wedding. Many Dornish lords were outraged, but Prince Doran counseled restraint, unwilling to risk all-out war without a clear plan. Secrecy became Oberin's shield. If Tywin thought him dead or powerless, all the better. But Tywin was no fool. Soon enough, scouts and spies would inform him that Oberyn Martell roamed the neck, banding with northern rebels. That knowledge would spark a new wave of retribution. The night of betrayal had changed everything, but Oberin had survived once more, narrowly, painfully, but undeniably. Each day he practiced with spear or sword, ignoring the twinges in his battered body. Each day he pored over maps of the north, memorizing strongholds, roads, lesser-known passes. He was forging a new path, one that might lead him eventually to King's Landing itself. In the hush of a swampy dawn, he stood on a small rise, leaning on a spear as the morning mists curled around him. He watched the pale sun rise over a land that had become his sanctuary and battleground. His good eye burned with an intensity that overshadowed the pain. The memory of Robb Stark's final breaths haunted him, as did the memory of Elia and the dream of avenging all the wrongs inflicted by House Lannister. A wind rustled the reeds, carrying the scent of water and peat. Oberin exhaled, letting that savage yearning for justice fill him. He murmured, half to himself, "I have survived the mountain, I have survived the phrase. I am the Red Viper, and I will not be tamed by any man's treachery." Behind him, Nymeria and Obara approached. They said nothing, merely standing with their father in the dawn light, each resolved in her own way. Around them, men and women who had lost everything sharpened their weapons, planning the next strike in a war that had gone dark and desperate. So it was that Oberyn Martell, bloody but unbowed, began leading Dorne north in spirit if not in full force. The lines between houses blurred, loyal Crannogmen, scattered Northmen still true to the memory of their fallen king, fierce Dornish outriders thirsting for vengeance. In the chaos left by the Red Wedding, they found glimmers of hope in each other's resolve. Though they had been struck a grievous blow, they were far from finished. Word spread in hushed rumors of a serpent coiled in the marshes, waiting to strike out at the betrayers who feasted on the corpses of the Starks. Some said that the spirit of the North lived on in this ragged band, that the sun and spear had somehow embraced the direwolf's cause. Others scoffed, calling it a last, desperate gasp of a rebellion that had been cut off at its head. But Oberyn Martell, who had defied death twice, knew better. In the nights to come, they launched raids on Bolton camps, freed prisoners from Frye dungeons, and left messages scrawled in blood. You murdered guests beneath your roof. The North remembers. Dorne remembers. At times, the Dornish brand of warfare. Poisoned arrows in the dark, infiltration, terrified the local garrisons. The rebels became ghosts in the bogs, serpents in the grass. Through it all, Oberyn endured, forging uneasy alliances with hill tribes and hidden loyalists. He sometimes spared a thought for Prince Doran, who surely heard rumors from across the realm. Doran would keep waiting, no doubt, for the right moment. Perhaps that moment would come, and when it did, House Martell might openly ride to war. And so the Red Viper's story became entwined with the ghost of the fallen wolf. While the realm reeled from the shock of the Red Wedding, while King's Landing thought it had destroyed the last threat, a secret war brewed in the north. Day by day, Oberyn gathered intelligence, forging plans to disrupt the Bolton hold on Winterfell, to stoke rebellion among the northern lords, to carve a path for vengeance that might stretch all the way back to the Iron Throne itself. He wore his scars openly, never once hiding the patch over his ruined eye, the battered line of his jaw. He wanted them to know that no matter how many times they tried to kill him, he would rise again to strike. Winter loomed on the horizon, promising cold and hardship, but Oberyn Martell cared little for the freeze. Let the snows come if they must. He had survived pain beyond measure, tasted the bitterness of repeated betrayals, and yet still lived. The North, he realized, was as harsh and unyielding as the desert, where the sand scalded and the sun burned in Dorne. Here the wind froze and the ice cut to the bone. But in both places, life endured through sheer will. That was what he and his allies would cling to. Amid the swirling conflicts, the question aimed whether Oberyn's stand in the north would truly succeed in avenging Robb Stark and bringing Tywin Lannister to his knees. But the Red Viper cared not for the odds. The taste of vengeance spurred him. The memory of Elia and her children fired his blood, and the heartbreak of failing to save Robb Stark seared his conscience. He vowed that if the realm would not do justice, he would make a new realm, carved out by the spear and the sword. In the end, legends told of a scarred Dornish prince who roamed the frosty hills and swamps of the Neck, forging a rebel brotherhood of northerners and Dornish exiles. Though the official histories might relegate them to a footnote in the War of the Five Kings, the common folk whispered that the ghostly raiders at Moat Cailin carried with them the fury of two great houses wronged, House Martell, never forgetting the murder of Elia, and House Stark, betrayed under guest right. In those whispers, Oberyn Martell's name gained a new dimension. Not just the Red Viper of Dorne, but the man who dragged the heat of the Dornish sun into the icy realms of the north, determined to see Lannister power crumble at last. And so their story marched onward, uncertain yet unyielding, forging an unlikely tapestry of sand and snow, serpent and wolf. For if there was one lesson Oberyn Martell had learned upon cheating death twice, it was that no matter how bleak the night, how cunning the foe, a single spark of resolve could ignite a firestorm, and a single drop of venom, if placed correctly, could bring even the mightiest beast to its knees. The days blurred into weeks as Oberyn Martell and his surviving allies, both Dornish and Northern, adjusted to life in the swamps of the Neck. Shrouded by mist and tall reeds, the Crannogmen's stilt villages offered a measure of protection from Frye and Bolton patrols. Small huts perched atop wooden pillars were strung together by narrow walkways that seemed to vanish into the muddy waters below. In that ghostly landscape, Oberyn found a refuge that felt simultaneously alien and strangely comforting. The Neck was a land of hidden strength and quiet watchers, as fierce in its way as the sun-baked deserts of Dorne. He spent his recovery in one such stilt hut, where the Crannogmen had spread out woven mats for him to rest upon. Each time a fever wave came, Tyene or one of the local healers dabbed a cloth across his brow, coaxing him to drink pungent teas spiced with salt and swamp herbs. The reek of bog water was omnipresent, but Oberyn had learned to appreciate any dryness overhead. Each day he forced himself to exercise, to stand upright with his spear for support. The head wound never truly stopped aching, and the patch over his ruined eye remained an uneasy burden that altered his balance. Yet he pressed onward, refusing to let pain define him. The sand snakes alternated between relief at having their father alive and frustration at his determination to push himself. Obara often tried to coax him into resting. "Take your time," she would say, arms folded over her breastplate. "We can't have you collapsing in the middle of a sword stroke." Oberin would shake his head. "Time is the one thing we may not have," he would reply. The Boltons and Freys tighten their grip on the north every passing day. Tywin Lannister gloats in King's Landing. "If we linger too long in these swamps, the cause dies with us." Sometimes, late at night, he prowled the walkways that snaked through the marsh village, restless and unable to sleep. He would lean on the railings, gazing down into the dark waters, recalling how close he had come to death at the Red Wedding. The memory of Robb Stark, that final gurgling breath, gnawed at him like an old wound. He relived the betrayal, Walder Frey's sneering face, the bolts that pierced the king in the North's body. Vengeance still thundered through Oberin's veins, refusing to abate. He was not alone in that thirst for retribution. Many Northmen who had survived or lost kinsmen at the twins boiled with fury. Their hatred for the Boltons and Freys churned as hotly as Oberin's for the Lannisters. But with Robb Stark dead, the North's leadership was scattered. Some spoke of the vanished Stark heirs, Bran and Rickon presumed slain, Arya's fate unknown, Sansa a hostage in King's Landing. Others wondered if they should appeal to Stannis Baratheon, rumored to have traveled to the Wall to fight off the wildlings. But no one quite knew how to unify that anger into a cohesive force. In that vacuum, Oberyn found himself leading by necessity rather than design. Northern bannermen like Galbart Glover, Donnell Locke, and a scattering of others turned to him for direction, if only because he was a princely figure from a powerful southern house. It felt strange. He was an outsider, and he bore the name Martell, so often spoken with caution in the north. Yet they had witnessed his willingness to fight alongside Robb, his near-miraculous survival after the Red Wedding, and the savage skill he brought to ambushes. There was no one else to rally behind, so the battered remnants of the North's armies fell in behind the Red Viper. One misty morning, they convened in a larger Crannog keep built atop an artificial mound of packed earth. The Crannogmen of House Reed had stacked peat blocks to create a courtyard of sorts, ringed by sharpened stakes. A thin drizzle fell from the sky, trickling through the ferns and thick moss. Oberin stood beneath a canopy of woven reeds, leaning upon his spear. Galbart Glover and Obara flanked him, while a handful of lesser lords ringed the space with watchful eyes. "We can remain hidden here indefinitely, but that will achieve little," Oberin said, letting his words drift through the hush. "The Freys and Boltons tighten their noose around the north. Soon, they will choke off what remains of your houses, devour your holdings, and rule with the backing of the Iron Throne. If we are to strike, we must strike wisely." Galbart Glover, a man with sunken cheeks and a beard grown wild, nodded grimly. "I have heard rumors. The Dreadfort's men ride along the eastern roads. Frey patrols come from the south, blocking the main routes. We can hamper them with raids, but it's not enough." Obara's tone was clipped. "Every time we hit them, we tear at their supply lines. Keeps them cautious, but it does not truly threaten their hold. With the king in the north gone, many northern houses see no reason to rise. Some have bent the knee to the Boltons to save their own skins." A hush fell. They all knew fear had spread. Without a Stark to rally around, small folk and lords alike hesitated to risk open rebellion. Tyene Sands spoke from a corner. She was gentler than Obara, but no less formidable. "We need a symbol, something or someone that can give them hope. We lost King Robb, but there must be another path. Perhaps news from the Wall, or from White Harbor, might reveal a path forward." At that, a Crannogman with moss-green eyes and a jerkin of boiled leather stepped forward. "White Harbor is the largest city in the north, held by House Manderly. If anyone might stand against the Boltons, it would be the Manderlys, but only if they believe they have allies." Oberin absorbed this. He had studied maps of the north, so different from Dorne's deserts and mountains. White Harbor was the north's lone significant port. He had gleaned that the Manderlys were wealthy and rumored to have hidden loyalties to the Starks, despite outward appearances of bowing to the new regime. "How guarded is the road to White Harbor?" he asked. Another Crannogman, older and stiff in the knees, answered, "It will be watched. Bolton men range there. Freys watch the crossings. Yet it's not impossible to slip past them. especially if you know the old fisherfolk paths. Oberin exchanged glances with Galbart Glover. If we can reach White Harbor, we might secure a safe foothold, perhaps even ships that could carry messages south. We could call on loyalists in the north, or perhaps smuggle men to Dorne. But it's a gamble. Galbart's jaw set. We have nothing else but gambles. The Boltons bleed us out day by day. I say we attempt it. Our cause needs more than hidden stilt villages. So the decision was made. A small party would travel east, braving the highways and forest tracks. Their aim was to meet with House Manderley and see if the seeds of alliance could be planted. Oberyn volunteered to lead, for he knew that a Martell prince, rumored dead, might be a potent figure to present, an undeniable sign that House Martell had not abandoned the north. If that failed, well, they would return to the marshes and seek another path. The next morning, they prepared quietly. A group of 30 set out, including Oberin, Nymeria, Obara, Tyene, and a handful of northern lords, Galbart Glover, Donnell Locke, and small retinues. The rest would remain in the neck, led by the other sand snakes and a few loyal Northmen. Before departing, Oberin took each of his daughters by the wrist, ensuring they understood the risk. If this mission failed, they could all end up in a Bolton dungeon. The sand snakes looked at him steadily, unafraid. They traveled under the cover of dusk, slipping through boggy tracks where the marsh water sometimes rose to their horses' knees. The crannogmen guided them along causeways that seemed to vanish into the gloom. At times, they dismounted and led their steeds over fallen logs or waded across shallow streams. The sense of isolation was immense. Mist curled across the water, making shapes that resembled half-formed ghosts. In those damp nights, Oberin felt the echo of old battles. He remembered the dryness of Dorne, the bright sun overhead. Everything here was saturated with gloom, the air cool upon his scarred face. But the cause was the same: vengeance, justice, the memory of fallen friends. The face of Robb Stark, young, determined, haunted him. Oberin tried to push it aside, focusing on the living faces around him, especially his daughters. When they emerged from the swampy lowlands onto firmer ground, they faced new dangers. Bolton outriders patrolled the main roads. Frye men held certain bridges, so they avoided the main routes, instead skirting through thick forests and overgrown trails. More than once, they spotted a troop of mounted soldiers wearing pale pink cloaks embroidered with the flayed man of House Bolton. The sight quickened everyone's hearts with anger and fear. Oberin insisted on total silence, pulling the group off the path and into dense undergrowth until the patrol passed. After a week of slow, tense travel, they finally approached the wide road that led to White Harbor. The land opened up, revealing rolling green fields and farmland dotted with sheep. A ways off, they glimpsed the winding White Knife River, its surface glittering under a pale sun. The city itself perched near the estuary, where the river poured into the Bight. Its white walls and towers rose above the waterline. Through spyglasses, they saw merchant ships moored at piers, the faint glimmer of sails. A sense of relief mingled with caution. This was civilization, but it was also a place where the Boltons' reach might extend. They made camp in a copse of elm trees a few miles from the city gate. Donnell Locke went ahead with 3 men, carrying false papers that declared them merchants. They were to assess the mood in White Harbor, discover whether Lord Wyman Manderley was truly disposed to defy the Boltons in secret. If the port city was thoroughly compromised, if Manderley had openly sworn allegiance to the Dreadfort, then Oberin and his band might be riding into a snare. 2 tense days passed. Oberin and the others concealed their camp as best they could, tethering horses beneath dense canopies, stifling any cooking fires for fear of smoke. They scouted the roads, noting the traffic, caravans hauling fish and grain, small folk on foot, the occasional group of northern soldiers wearing Bolton or Frye colors. At last, Donnell Locke returned, cloaked in the shadows of night. He rode into the camp with an expression of weary triumph. "Lord Wyman will see us," he murmured, voice pitched low. "He's playing a dangerous game, outwardly supporting the Boltons, but I believe he remains loyal to the memory of King Robb. He requested we come by night to a discreet side gate. He has a private guard he trusts." The risk remained great. This could be a trick, a ploy to draw them in. Yet their cause demanded boldness. So Oberin and the party readied themselves. They rode with minimal fanfare, cloaks pulled tight, guided by Donnell to a nondescript postern gate along the eastern wall of White Harbor. A few guards in Manderley livery bearing a silver trident on a dark green field waited with anxious faces. At a whispered order, the gate opened just wide enough to admit them in single file. Inside, narrow lanes twisted between warehouses and storehouses that smelled of fish and brine. Their horses' hooves clopped quietly on wet cobblestones, the sound muffled by thick fog rolling off the water. Soon, they reached a courtyard behind an unassuming building that stood near Manderley's keep. Oberin dismounted, glancing about warily. A short, stocky man with a heavy girth and watchful eyes approached, flanked by a handful of guards. His clothing was fine, though in subdued colors. "Welcome to White Harbor, my friends," he said, voice measured. "I am Wendell Manderley, son of Lord Wyman. My father awaits you inside." Oberin's breath caught. He recalled that Wendell Manderley had been rumored slain at the Red Wedding, but now he realized this must be another son. Wylus was the eldest, if memory served, and Wendell was indeed reported dead. Perhaps Manderley had more kin than Oberin remembered. Lore swirling around House Manderley often confused outsiders. Obara cast Oberin a glance, verifying that they should continue. Oberin nodded, stepping forward with measured confidence. "We are grateful for your discretion, my lord." Wendell's eyes flicked to Oberin's face, to the patch that shielded the ruined eye, and widened slightly as though confirming a rumor. Then he inclined his head, turning to lead them through a side entrance. Guards closed ranks behind them, isolating them from the city beyond. It was a tense few minutes, weaving through torchlit corridors that smelled of sea salt and damp stone until they arrived at a private audience chamber. There, seated in a reinforced chair draped in furs, was the enormous figure of Lord Wyman Manderley, a man famed for his girth and for his cunning. He was older now, his face lined with worry, but he managed a courteous smile. "Prince Oberyn Martell," he said in a soft voice that still carried weight. "When I received word you were here, I almost believed it a jest. You were said to have perished in King's Landing, then again at the Twins. Yet here you stand, twice born from the jaws of death." Oberin inclined his head, his voice steady. "I have indeed learned how precarious life can be, my lord. I bring greetings from those few Northmen still loyal to the memory of Robb Stark. They hide in the neck, but they do not cower. They mean to fight." Lord Wyman's face grew solemn. "All the North loved King Robb, but the Red Wedding has shattered us. My city remains under scrutiny by the Boltons. The Freys watch my every move." Yet, he paused, glancing at his son, then continuing. "I am not blind to what they did at the Twins. Guest right is sacred. They spat on our traditions. For that, I will never forgive them." The chamber's torches flickered. Outside the narrow windows, one could hear the faint lap of water. Oberin knew he stood at a crossroads. They needed Manderley's support, food, shelter, a place to coordinate. But pushing too hard might spook Lord Wyman into refusing. Nymeria Sand stepped forward, bowing her head in a gesture of respect. "My lord, House Martell remembers the murder of innocents just as the North remembers. Our father is here to honor an alliance that should never have been cut short by betrayal." Manderley studied her, then gestured for all to be seated. Servants brought mulled wine in plain clay cups. Oberin noticed the caution: no lavish feast, no pageantry. This was a meeting carried out with secrecy. He took a cup, though he sipped slowly, aware that poison remained a possibility. He had to remind himself that not every cunning man was out to kill him. Lord Wyman spoke at length. He described the predicament faced by White Harbor. The Boltons, elevated to wardens of the North, demanded fealty and taxes. Frey agents lurked, ensuring that no messages traveled south or across the sea without scrutiny. If House Manderley was caught sheltering rebels, especially the famously vengeful Oberyn Martell, retaliation would be swift. They might lose the city, or worse. Yet Manderley confessed that his heart yearned to see the Bolton Frey dominion toppled. "The Starks were always good to White Harbor," he murmured, swirling the wine in his cup. "And they were rightful rulers. I will never forgive what was done to them." Oberin leaned forward in his seat. "Then help us. We do not ask you to raise banners openly. But we must have somewhere to rest, to plan, to gather supplies. You can funnel men or messages to us discreetly. When the time comes, if we can muster enough support, you can choose the moment to strike. White Harbor's resources are substantial. You could help reclaim the North from these usurpers." Lord Wyman pursed his lips, considering. The Boltons hold Winterfell now, though it's said that castle remains in partial ruin after the Ironborn sacked it. Roose Bolton has legitimized his bastard, Ramsay Snow, calling him Ramsay Bolton. A savage beast, that one. The common folk tremble at the mention of his name. Every day, they reinforce their hold on the region. But you are correct. If we wait for them to tighten every chain, we'll be crushed. He made his decision. Under the watchful eyes of his son and his guard, Lord Manderley pledged covert aid. He would grant Oberin and his band a safe house by the docks disguised as a minor warehouse. There, they could rest and receive shipments. Manderley would send loyal men under the pretense of new watchmen or laborers. He would also help them arrange sea passage if Oberin needed to send emissaries to Dorne or anywhere else. But he warned them that open rebellion would be suicidal without broader backing. Dorne alone cannot hold the north, he said, addressing Oberin. And we have not heard any whispers of a living Stark who can rally the old banners. If only one of the young Starks had survived Bran, Rickon, Arya. Sansa is in the south, they say, wed to Lannisters. Without a Stark, we cannot hope to unify this land. A fleeting grimace crossed Oberin's face. I know, but we must do what we can. That night, the 30 who had ridden with Oberin found quarters in a boarded-up warehouse near the wharves. By daylight, it looked abandoned, shutters bolted, crates stacked haphazardly. But inside, Manderley's trusted servants had laid out cots and stored enough grain, salted fish, and water for a small company. A hidden trapdoor led to an underground storage area that connected to the city's sewer channels, a possible route of escape should Bolton or Fry men come sniffing. Over the next few weeks, Oberin and his companions lived in that half-concealed life. They wore rough-spun cloaks and tried to blend with the dockworkers when venturing out to gather intelligence. Tyene spent her days in a makeshift laboratory corner in the basement, concocting subtle poisons or antidotes from local flora. Nymeria prowled the alleys, forging contacts with Manderley's secret scouts. Obara grew restless, longing for open battle. She channeled her energy into sparring with any northern soldier willing to cross swords. Oberin met with Lord Wyman in secret from time to time, exchanging news of the broader realm. Rumors drifted in from King's Landing. Joffrey Baratheon was dead, poisoned at his own wedding feast. Tommen, the Boy King, now sat the Iron Throne with Tywin Lannister still the true power behind it. The Tyrells were firmly allied with the crown. Sansa Stark had vanished amidst the chaos. Some whispered she might have killed Joffrey or been spirited away by Littlefinger. Oberyn felt only a grim satisfaction at the news that Joffrey was dead. It avenged Ned Stark in a small way, but Tywin was still alive, the real architect of so many horrors. In the north, Roose Bolton ruled as warden while Ramsay terrorized the countryside. Winterfell was under reconstruction and many lesser lords gritted their teeth and bent the knee. The Freys claimed new lands along the Green Fork, adding further insult to the old families who had once sworn to House Tully or House Stark. Oberyn was no stranger to infiltration and sabotage. He realized that small steps might gradually undermine Bolton authority. If they could free key hostages or orchestrate the downfall of a major Frey ally, the cracks might widen. And if they could ever prove that a Stark heir yet lived, the North might erupt once more. He recalled Lady Catelyn's claims that both Bran and Rickon had escaped Theon's grasp, though no one knew the truth. If either boy survived, finding him would be a game-changer. Late one evening, as the tide lapped against the wharf, Oberin stood on the warehouse roof, gazing at the flickering lanterns along White Harbor's walls. He wore a simple cloak, though the patch over his eye was distinctive. Nymeria stepped up beside him, breathing in the salt air. "Father," she said softly, "I don't see how we can break the Boltons without a stronger ally. If Prince Doran would commit the might of Dorne, we might have a chance. But do we dare try to bring an entire Dornish army north? Tywin Lannister would move to crush us." Oberyn exhaled. "Doran is cautious. He won't commit to open war unless he's certain we can win. I sent him letters. By now, he knows that I live, that I'm forging alliances here. But I expect no swift reply. Still, there may be another route." He explained how House Martell, in the days of old, sometimes struck at their enemies from the sea. If Manderley could discreetly muster ships or find allies among the Ironborn who also despised the Boltons, perhaps they could stage a coastal raid. It was a half-formed plan, but a plan nonetheless. Their chance came unexpectedly. A group of Bolton knights arrived in White Harbor under Ramsay Bolton's banner. They marched into the city with chests of coin, demanding provisions for a renewed push eastward, apparently to quell pockets of outlaws that had sprung up near the coast. Whispers suggested that these outlaws might be Ironborn or bandits, but no one was quite sure. Lord Wyman was forced to receive them openly. Meanwhile, Oberyn and his band hovered in the shadows, worried that the knights might sniff them out. During that tense week, The Bolton Knights quartered themselves in a tavern near the city center, harassing local folk. Their captain, a sneering man named Ser Hother Whitehill, boasted that House Bolton would soon make the entire North bow or bleed. He drank heavily, menaced any who looked at him askance, and threatened to have them flayed if they displeased him. Oberin heard these reports from Manderley's servants, anger seething in his veins. But to strike at Ser Hother openly would risk exposing Manderley's complicity. On a cold, drizzling night, that chance for vengeance arrived. Ser Hother grew so drunk that he and 2 of his men staggered into the dockside district, evidently in search of sport. They cornered a pair of local girls near an alley, ignoring the pleas of the local watchman who tried to intervene. Word reached Oberin's ears quickly, carried by a panicked watchman who recognized that these knights outranked him. Oberin and Obara went out, disguised in hooded cloaks with 2 Northmen in tow. They found Ser Hother in a narrow alley, the stench of fish guts and rotting rope thick in the air. The Bolton Knight had pinned one of the girls against a crate while his men jeered. Oberin felt fury coil in his chest. This was a microcosm of Bolton rule, a slow strangulation of decency. He stepped forward, speaking quietly but with the lethal edge that had earned him the name Red Viper. "Release them," he said, "or you'll lose more than your coin." Ser Hother spun around, reeking of ale, bleary-eyed. "Who dares speak to me?" he snarled. But he peered through the gloom, seeing the shape of a tall man with a drawn dagger. "You must not know who I am. I ride for Ramsay Bolton, and I do as I please in this city." Obara stood just behind Oberin, her spear at the ready under her cloak. The 2 Bolton men flanked Ser Hother, uncertain whether to laugh off the threat. One advanced, sword half-drawn. "Bugger off or we'll carve you. You're outnumbered, fool." It was all the opening Oberin needed. He flicked his wrist, and a throwing knife sailed through the air. It struck the approaching soldier in the throat, cutting off any shout of alarm. Blood spurted. The other soldier cursed, drawing his weapon fully. Obara's spear flashed out from beneath her cloak, driving clean into his chest before he could blink. The alley flickered with torchlight from the far street, revealing the glint of steel and the pale shock on the dying man's face. Ser Hother reeled, suddenly sober, hand dropping to his sword. He managed to get the blade half free of its scabbard when Oberin lunged. They clashed in a tight space, steel scraping against steel in savage arcs. Hother was strong but sluggish from drink. Oberin, though battered from old injuries, moved with a serpent's grace. Their blades locked, and Oberin thrust the knight's sword aside, twisting in with a punishing elbow strike to his jaw. Hother staggered backward. "Bastard," he spat, blood dribbling down his chin. "Who are you?" Oberin's single good eye glowed with lethal purpose. "The ghost of the Red Wedding," he hissed, "come to repay old debts." Ser Hother's pupils dilated in recognition. He tried to shout for help, but Obara's spear point was at his throat. A single thrust, and Ser Hother gasped. Oberin followed with a swift slash across the belly. They left him bleeding into the gutter, the city's stench mingling with the reek of his spilt entrails. The girls, cowering by the crates, stared in wide-eyed terror. Oberin tried to reassure them, but they fled into the darkness. He understood. In a land ruled by the Boltons, they might fear retribution even for being saved. At once he and Obara dragged the bodies deeper into the alley, tossing them behind some rotted barrels. They stripped the Bolton men of any obvious insignias. Obara wiped her spear clean, her lips set in a grim line. "If this is discovered," she began. "It will be," Oberin said flatly. "But they won't trace it back to Manderley, not easily. We have to vanish now." They slipped back to the warehouse before watchmen or curious townsfolk could arrive. It wasn't the first time Bolton soldiers had turned up dead in a city alley, but it was the first time a Bolton knight and 2 of his men had simply disappeared. The next day, tension rippled through White Harbor. The other Bolton knights stormed about, demanding answers, interrogating local watchmen. Lord Wyman played the role of affronted host, promising an investigation. He quietly allowed Oberin and his people to stay hidden. Within a matter of days, the Bolton contingent left in a fury, taking their supply wagons and heading south. White Harbor breathed easier, except Oberin knew it was only temporary. The Boltons would grow suspicious. Sooner or later, they would come back in greater force, or they would blame the Manderleys for not producing the culprits. It was in that moment of uncertain peace that a new rumor arrived, carried by a hooded traveler from the north. A boy had been seen near the old holdfast of the Umbers, a boy who claimed to be Rickon Stark, youngest son of Ned Stark, accompanied by a wildling woman. The details were murky, the rumor inconsistent, but the traveler swore he had caught a glimpse of a boy with the dire wolf of House Stark embroidered on a patched cloak. He said the Umbers had offered them shelter in their fortress near the last hearth. The traveler wasn't certain if it was truly Rickon, but the name alone set hearts pounding. Galbart Glover latched onto the story at once. If this is real, if one of the Stark boys is alive, the North might rally again. The Umbers are fearsome in war and they despise the Boltons. Oberin felt a flicker of renewed hope. The idea that the North could still have a living Stark changed everything. Even if Rickon was just a child, symbolic power mattered. He turned the rumor over in his mind, remembering how Robb had once spoken of his younger siblings. Rickon was the wild one, barely old enough to hold a sword. "We must confirm this," Oberin said. "If Rickon Stark truly lives, we have a cause to unify the North." But Umbers, for all their size and ferocity, were deep in Bolton territory. Roose Bolton, likely aware that the Umbers could pose a threat, might move quickly to snuff out any rumored Stark. The question was whether a small party could slip north, confirm the rumor, and bring Rickon to safety or raise his banner. Galbart Glover volunteered without hesitation. "The Umbers and Glovers have long been allies. If we can prove the boy's identity, we can proclaim him a Stark. It won't bring King Robb back, but it could light a new spark of rebellion." Oberin considered the risk. White Harbor was relatively safe for the moment, and each mission behind enemy lines strained them further. Still, the potential reward was too great. He agreed that a small band should travel to the last hearth, or wherever rumor pointed. If they found Rickon Stark, they could shape the fate of the North. He hesitated, torn between leading the expedition himself and remaining in White Harbor to coordinate. Ultimately, he decided to stay, reasoning that Manderley City was their best foothold in the North. If the Boltons discovered he was up north sniffing about, the entire region would explode in hunts for him. Instead, Galbart Glover, Obara Sand, and half a dozen experienced scouts would undertake the journey. The night before they departed, Oberin privately took Obara aside. She was a woman of fierce temperament, her hair cut brutally short, her gaze perpetually challenging. "Daughter," he said, voice quiet in the warehouse's gloom, "you are as strong as any warrior I've known, but this mission will test you. The Umbers are large in pride and in muscle. If they do shelter Rickon Stark, they may not trust an outsider. Present yourself as my envoy. If the boy is who they say, keep him safe." Obara's expression was determined. "I will. If the boy truly is a Stark, I'll see him returned here so we can rally the North, or I'll fight by his side. I won't let the Boltons take another Stark's life." Oberin embraced her briefly, feeling the weight of fatherhood mingling with the tension of their cause. "Go then. The Red Viper's blood runs in your veins. Let no one doubt it." And so Obara rode out with Glover and their company, clad in furs better suited for northern weather, her spear strapped across her back. Nymeria and Tyene stayed behind in White Harbor, continuing their tasks. In the ensuing weeks, Oberin advanced a plan with Lord Wyman to organize a quiet supply route from the city to the Neck, enabling the scattered rebels to grow in strength. Merchant caravans and fishing boats would smuggle arms, armor, and medicine. Manderley's ship captains, known for their loyalty, could ferry messages to other potential allies along the coast. Slowly, they laid the groundwork for a broader uprising. Meanwhile, Oberin could not banish worry for Obara's expedition. The road to the last hearth was rife with danger, Bolton outriders, roving bandits, savage weather. Weeks passed without word. The chill of oncoming winter deepened so that White Harbor's docks sometimes had to break thin ice at dawn. Rumors of new cruelties from Ramsay Bolton trickled in, stories of flayed peasants, burned villages, monstrous hunts of young women. Each rumor spurred Oberin's hatred further. Then, on a morning when the sky shone a pale gray, Galbart Glover returned, haggard, with fewer men than when he had left. Obara was not with him. Oberin felt a jolt of dread as Glover rode into the discreet courtyard behind the warehouse. The man's face was ashen, his cloak smeared with mud and dried blood. He slid from his horse, staggering, barely able to stand. Nymeria rushed to support him while Tywin pressed a water skin to his cracked lips. Oberin loomed close, his voice tight. What happened? Where is Obara? Glover coughed, drawing a ragged breath. Captured, he rasped. We made it to the Umbers, but we were too late. Bolton riders had come, searching for the boy. The Umbers tried to hide Rickon, but somehow the Boltons found out. We arrived in the midst of a fight. Oberin's fists clenched. A fight? Did the Umbers lose? Half their men were slaughtered. Lord Umber was wounded. Obara fought like a demon, but they had superior numbers. The boy, Rickon, we got him away, but not before the Boltons took Obara and 2 of my men. A hush of horror enveloped them. Tywin paled at the thought of her sister in the hands of Ramsay Bolton. Oberin's entire body tensed. He knew the Boltons specialized in torment, that their dungeons were filled with flayed skins and the screams of the unfortunate. His imagination conjured an image of Obara chained in some dark cell, tortured for information. Glover continued, voice trembling. Obara told me to flee with the boy to ensure he wasn't taken. She drew off the Bolton riders. We managed to slip away through the snow, forging east until we lost them. The Umbers who survived are regrouping, but they're wounded. As for the boy, we have him, Prince Oberin. He's truly Rickon Stark, or so the Umbers swear. The direwolf Shaggy Dog is with him. He's fierce, half wild. He's safe for now, but Obara is in terrible danger. Oberin closed his eye, summoning every shred of composure. Rickon Stark was indeed alive, a glimmer of hope for the north, but Obara was in Bolton hands. The knowledge cut deeper than any sword. He felt Tywin and Nymeria both trembling with anger. If they were to rescue their sister, they would have to move quickly. Yet any large-scale assault on Bolton territory risked doom for all. He inhaled sharply. Where's the boy now? We parted ways with the Umbers, Glover said. They'll hide him in an old fortress by the Bay of Seals along the northern coast. They trust no one. I promised we'd come for him once it was safe. We decided that bringing Rickon to White Harbor might be too conspicuous with the Boltons scouring the roads. I came here, hoping you'd have a plan. Oberin paced the courtyard, his boots scraping on the stone. The impetus to rescue Obara roared within him, but the strategic necessity of securing Rickon Stark's place as heir to Winterfell was equally pressing. Both goals clashed in his mind. He had to choose carefully. Yet he refused to abandon Obara to torture. She was his daughter, born of his blood, shaped by his teachings. He remembered her unwavering eyes, her unrelenting sense of pride. She would expect him to attempt a rescue or, at the least, avenge her if she fell. He turned to Nymeria. If the Boltons have her, they'll take her to the Dreadfort or to Winterfell. We must find out where. We'll need infiltration, but not a large force, or they'll see us coming. Nymeria's lips thinned. We'll do it. Let me lead the infiltration, father. I can be subtle where Obara was bold. Tywin clasped her hands, her voice trembling with controlled fear. I'll come as well. We have to free her. The Boltons will try to make her talk. She knows about White Harbor, our allies. The danger was immense. Yet Oberin knew they had no other choice. If Obara broke under torture, she might reveal the entire network. And even if she wouldn't talk, Oberin could not let her suffer at the hands of sadists. Then we go, he said hoarsely. Galbart, you and your men rest here. Take no risk. We'll gather a small infiltration team. If we must storm a castle, so be it. He felt Lord Wyman might balk at a direct assault, but Oberin was beyond caution. A flicker of dread lingered. The Boltons might guess that capturing Obara would lure him. Could it be a trap? Quite possibly. But Oberin's decision was made. Before nightfall, the shape of a plan emerged. They could not target the Dreadfort directly. Its reputation for impregnable walls and cunning defenses was well known. But if Obara had been taken near the last hearth, chances were that Ramsay might first bring her to a lesser outpost or a camp. The Bolton forces sometimes marched captives around to display them or inflicted torment in forward positions. Scouts would need to confirm her location. In the swirl of these preparations, Glover revealed more details of the ambush. Ramsay was not there in person, but one of his lieutenants was. A cruel man named Dagmar. He shouted that the bastard of Bolton would reward him if he brought back the famed she-devil with a spear. It seems they know who she is. That made the situation still more urgent. If Ramsay realized he had captured a sand snake, he would guess that Oberin or the other sisters might be nearby. The entire north could soon be crawling with huntsmen searching for them. They left White Harbor discreetly, traveling in pairs to avoid suspicion, reuniting at a prearranged point along a minor road. The infiltration party consisted of Oberin, Nymeria, Tywin, Heron of House Santagar, 2 fierce Umbers who had escaped the fight, and half a dozen northern scouts. Lord Wyman provided them with new cloaks and a cart of supplies labeled as fodder for livestock. They hoped to pass as a small caravan of commoners at a glance. If anyone stopped them, they had forged papers from Manderley scribes. As they journeyed north, winter's grip tightened. Snow dusted the pine branches. The air carried a biting chill that cut through even the thickest firs. Oberin's face ached, the scar tissue around his temple stinging at each gust of wind. Yet he pressed on. A father's resolve burned hotter than any desert sun. They avoided major roads, weaving through forest trails. Bolton outriders did roam, so they sometimes spent hours lying in the snow behind tree trunks, waiting for patrols to pass. On one such occasion, Tywin quietly pointed out that the outriders had flayed skin sewn onto their cloaks, shaped to resemble a man's face. The sight churned Oberin's stomach. Even in the stepstones or Essos, he had rarely seen such depravity. After many days of stealth, they neared the area around the last hearth. The land was bleak and rugged, dotted with outcroppings of bare rock. Crows circled in a bruised sky as if anticipating doom. They established a hidden camp in a ravine, half-sheltered by stunted pines. Then Oberin sent scouts to search for signs of Bolton encampments or fortresses. It took 2 nights before a scout returned, breath steaming in the cold air, to report that a modest garrison of Bolton men occupied a half-ruined tower near the banks of a frozen river. Smoke rose from that tower each morning, and sentries patrolled a battered Ker. Tain Wall. The scout had crept close enough to glimpse a courtyard behind the tower where caged prisoners were sometimes paraded. He thought he saw a woman with short, dark hair, battered but unbowed, forced to kneel among other captives. That was enough for Oberin. He felt raw fury at the image of Obara caged like an animal. So they formulated a plan of infiltration. Under the cover of dark, they would approach from the river's edge, cross a partially frozen stretch that might allow them to slip inside the wall's blind spot and deal with any guards quietly. Nymeria excelled at infiltration. Tywin prepared small vials of potent poison to coat throwing daggers or crossbow bolts. The northern scouts would provide archery support from a ridge. Harren Santagar and the Umbers would lead a direct assault on the courtyard once they created an opening. That very night, they moved. The moon was little more than a sliver behind scudding clouds. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling footsteps. They cut through a stand of pines, the wind sighing overhead. Despite the biting cold, Oberin felt sweat along his brow, driven by adrenaline. If this mission failed, Obara would suffer further atrocities and the Boltons might discover their entire network. They reached the edge of the frozen river. A thin crust of ice spread across the surface, though pockets of running water glimmered beneath. Gingerly, the group tested each step, wincing at occasional cracks. In single file, they made their way across, breathing slowly to keep from panic. The far bank was only about 50 paces away, but it felt like leagues. When at last they reached the other side, each one exhaled in relief. A short scramble up the embankment brought them within sight of the tower's broken walls. At some point in its history, a siege must have battered the fortress, leaving a wide gap in the curtain wall. Bolton soldiers had erected a crude palisade there, but it was not a perfect barrier. A guard dozed in a small turret overhead, his torch flickering. Another walked the perimeter, stamping his feet to keep warm. Nymeria pressed herself against the wall, waiting for the patrolling guard to pass. Then, with the fluid speed of a striking snake, she scaled the rough stone. She used a length of rope with a small grapnel to anchor herself, then motioned for Oberin and Tywin to follow. The climb was treacherous in the cold, fingers stiffening on the rope. But Oberin powered through, ignoring the complaining ache in his leg and skull. Once atop the crumbled wall, they crouched behind a jagged block of masonry. The dozing guard was perhaps 10 paces away, leaning against the turret's interior. One well-aimed dagger from Tywin, coated in her special toxin, ended him before he could stir. They then signaled the northern scouts with a small, hooded lantern. Moments later, arrows hissed from the dark, taking out the second guard below. Quietly, carefully, the infiltration party began letting down rope for Harren Santagar and the Umbers to scale up as well. Soon, a dozen men lurked atop the wall in the gloom. From there, they could see into the courtyard, a small muddy yard encircled by half-collapsed buildings. In the center, a cage fashioned from heavy iron bars. Through the swirling snow, Oberin caught a glimpse of figures huddled within. He thought he recognized Obara's posture, upright despite her condition, hair matted. A guard tower stood on the far side, candlelight flickering behind a narrow window. They descended into the courtyard by rope and broken walkways. The plan was to move swiftly, free the captives, kill or subdue the garrison, and vanish into the night. Oberin led the way, spear in hand. Tywin and Nymeria fanned out with knives. The Umbers, big men in thick cloaks, wielded axes. At first, it seemed they might achieve total surprise. They moved among the wrecked structures, footsteps muffled by snow. One guard had the misfortune of stepping outside to relieve himself behind a stack of barrels, and Umber's axe ended him before he made a sound. Another pair of Bolton soldiers dozed near a small brazier only to fall beneath silent arrows. Hope soared in Oberin's chest. Then a sudden shout rang out from the keep door. A guard returning from an outbuilding stumbled onto the scene, letting loose an alarmed cry. The clang of a signal bell followed. Instantly, the courtyard erupted with commotion. Sentries rushed to the parapets, brandishing torches. A half-dozen Bolton men poured out, swords drawn. Oberin and his allies had no choice but to fight. The courtyard exploded into savage melee, steel flashing under torchlight. The Umbers bellowed war cries, barreling into the Bolton guards. Nymeria's whip cracked around an ankle, yanking a man to the snow before an axe finished him. Tyene tossed a vial that shattered at the feet of two soldiers, releasing a noxious, choking vapor that left them retching. Oberin pivoted through the fray, spear darting with lethal precision. Even with one eye, he moved like a dancer, every stab guided by hatred for these men who served Ramsay Bolton. Amid the chaos, Oberin spotted the cage. He sprinted across the churned mud, narrowly ducking a crossbow bolt that thudded into a timber post. At the cage's door, a single guard fumbled with keys, shouting curses as he tried to ready a weapon. Oberin stabbed him through the back, feeling the jolt as the spear tip emerged through the man's chest. He kicked the corpse aside, snatched the key ring, and knelt to unlock the cage. Inside, 3 figures huddled. 2 were men, battered and bruised. The third was Obara Sand, her wrists shackled, her face swollen from beatings, but her eyes still ablaze. She seemed momentarily disoriented by the swirl of battle outside, blinking in the flaring torchlight. When her gaze fell on Oberin, a fierce glimmer of relief passed over her battered features. He got the cage open, then broke her shackles with a strike of his spear, but against the chain link. "Obara," he murmured, voice tight with relief, "can you stand?" She nodded, though her movements were stiff with pain. Bruises marred her arms and dried blood crusted her temple. "I can fight," she spat. "Give me a damned weapon." He didn't hesitate. He handed her a short sword he'd taken from one of the Bolton men. She grabbed it and pushed herself upright, stumbling slightly before steadying. Her lips curled in savage gratitude. The other 2 prisoners were half dead from exposure, but one could stand, the other had to be helped. "We're getting you out," Oberin said, turning to see the courtyard. Bolton soldiers scattered around, fending off the Umbers. Another crossbow bolt whizzed by, nearly grazing his shoulder. Obara hissed in fury and limped forward, determined to kill. In the flickering confusion, a tall Bolton man with an iron half-helm charged at them, roaring. Obara met him head-on, ignoring the pain of her injuries. She parried his overhead strike, then drove a knee into his midsection. He staggered, and her blade slashed across his throat with lethal finality. Blood sprayed onto the snow. Oberin found himself momentarily in awe of her resilience. She had been caged for days, tortured, yet she still fought like a force of nature. Through the swirling chaos, Tyene's voice called out, "We have to go." More Bolton men were spilling in from the tower, about to overwhelm them. The infiltration party had to withdraw before they were pinned down. Umbers near the gate bashed aside a barricade, opening a path to the outside. Oberin supported Obara as she limped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She refused to let him carry her. The other 2 freed prisoners shuffled behind them, aided by a northern scout. Nymeria covered their retreat, her whip snapping at any soldier foolish enough to lunge. Heron Santagar led a last push, parrying a halberd while caving in the wielder's skull with a mace. Despite the rising hue and cry, they managed to slip through the broken gate, climbing over rubble and spilled timbers. Bolton soldiers shouted from the walls, trying to aim crossbows in the dark. One arrow found a northern scout's shoulder, sending him sprawling in pain, but Tyene dragged him onward. They fled into the night, scattering among the trees before the garrison could mount a coordinated pursuit. By the time the Bolton men rallied, the courtyard was a scene of bodies and fire. The infiltration party vanished into the pines, converging at the rendezvous by the river. Swiftly, they crossed the ice once more, though it cracked ominously under the weight of so many. A few nearly fell in. But fortune held, and soon they vanished into the dark forest on the opposite shore, leaving behind the faint glow of torches and outraged shouts. They pressed on for hours, not daring to rest. Obara, half stumbling from pain, refused to slow their pace. Eventually, just before dawn, they found a sheltered hollow where ancient fir trees clustered, forming a windbreak. There, they tended wounds by the light of a small covered lantern. Nymeria and Tyene wept with relief as they embraced Obara. Oberin crouched beside them, letting out a breath he'd held for what felt like days. Obara's wounds were serious but not mortal. Bruises covered her body, and welts along her arms told of savage beatings. She had fresh lash marks across her shoulders, dried blood caking the torn fabric of her tunic. Tyene examined her carefully, applying salves that stung. Obara clenched her jaw, refusing to cry out, though her eyes fluttered with pain. Oberin asked, voice tight, "Did they learn anything from you?" Her gaze flashed. "I told them nothing. They tried everything they could, bragging of what Ramsay would do once they delivered me. I spat in their faces. Let them stew." He exhaled a ragged breath, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. The closeness of losing her, and the knowledge of what might have happened in a Bolton dungeon, twisted his heart. "You have the resilience of a true sand snake," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." She managed a half-smile. "I fear you've more daughters than sense, father, but we'll repay the Boltons for this." So they stayed hidden in the hollow for a day, nursing wounds, burying a northern scout who had succumbed to an arrow lodged deep in his lung. Then they resumed their flight southward, knowing that the Boltons would launch hunts in all directions. Their only hope was to slip away under cover of the forests, returning to White Harbor or the Neck. The journey was harrowing. Snowstorms hammered them, and they had precious few supplies. Twice, they nearly blundered into Bolton search parties. Once, they had to wade through a frigid stream to avoid detection, emerging shivering and numb. Night after night, they slept in the lee of rocks or under low, evergreen branches, rotating watch. All the while, Obara limped, but she refused to accept a crutch. Oberin coaxed her to lean on him, but she insisted on walking unassisted, her pride refusing to bend. Eventually, they reached safer lands, closer to White Harbor. They encountered no major patrols and found that Lord Wyman's men had begun discreetly clearing certain paths. A final, exhausting ride brought them to the city gates, and Manderley's loyal watchmen let them in with minimal fuss. Their small group staggered into the concealed warehouse. Nymeria immediately set about preparing a warm bath for Obara. Tyene rummaged for fresh bandages and supplies. Heron Santagar sank onto a cot, pressing a hand to his bruised ribs. Oberin watched them all, feeling relief swirl with bitterness. They had rescued Obara, but the Boltons would now be on high alert. Worse, he had learned from Glover that Rickon Stark was hidden near the Bay of Seals, cut off from direct support. When Obara finally emerged from her bath, leaning on Tyene for support, Oberin helped settle her onto a bed of blankets. He studied her face, noticing the fresh scars and the shadows in her eyes. She gripped his hand. "I told them nothing, but the Boltons know the sand snakes roam the north. They know we're allied with certain lords. They'll be tightening the noose." Oberin nodded. "Then we must show them the noose can strangle them in return. We have Rickon, or at least we know where he is. If the Umbers can keep him safe, perhaps we can coordinate a strike come spring. We'll need House Manderley and House Glover and any other houses that remain loyal. We'll free the north from the Boltons and the Freys if it's the last thing we do." Nymeria stood nearby, her expression somber. "It may well be the last thing, father, but we'll fight for it anyway." Word filtered in that the rumored child with a direwolf had indeed stirred up quiet murmurs among various northern enclaves. Some believed Rickon to be an imposter, but others thought the boy seemed exactly like a Stark in temperament. Wild, brave, quick to anger. If they could bring him forward at the right time, with enough men backing him, the flayed man might yet topple from the walls of Winterfell. In the days that followed, Obara healed slowly, cursing her battered legs. Bolton search parties arrived in White Harbor, claiming to seek dangerous criminals. Lord Wyman put on a grand display of compliance, hosting them in a lavish feast while ironically making them all so full of sweets and heavy wine that they scarcely had energy to search thoroughly. Oberin and his people lay low in the warehouse. Yet each such incursion reminded them that time was short. Finally, a new raven came from the Neck. The mountain clans near the Vale had shown interest in rising against the Freys, who also threatened their trade routes. The message recommended that the rebels move swiftly to unify the scattered foes of House Bolton. With winter coming on in earnest, campaigning would become more difficult each passing week. Oberin assembled his captains in the warehouse's makeshift war room, a dusty corner with a large table covered in parchment maps. There, by the light of oil lamps, he addressed them. "We have White Harbor's quiet support. We have pockets of strength in the neck, the Umbers near the Bay of Seals, and Glover's men in the western forests. If we can coordinate them, we can wage a campaign of steady attrition on the Boltons, forcing them to spread thin. Perhaps the Freys will not be so quick to aid once the road south is threatened by bandits and sabotage. In time, we show Rickon Stark to the north. If all goes well, we can besiege Winterfell or even the Dreadfort." Obara, seated on a bench with her leg bandaged, smirked. "Sounds a grand plan, but Tywin Lannister's shadow looms. He'll not let a Bolton collapse go unanswered. He'll send men or money or both." Oberin's gaze was steely. "Let him. Dorne has long awaited a chance to strike at the Lannisters. If Tywin diverts men north, he weakens his position elsewhere. With Prince Doran's subtle maneuvers, we might rouse the rest of Dorne to open war if the right moment arises. One victory at a time." Tyene, adjusting the arrangement of the maps, asked quietly, "And what of the rightful king? Tommen sits the throne, the Tyrells support him, and we have no Targaryen with an army. Where does this end, father?" Oberyn closed his eye, considering the swirl of uncertain alliances. "Perhaps, in time, we find a Targaryen cause to unify with. Perhaps not. Right now, our priority is avenging the Red Wedding and dethroning the Boltons in the north. One step at a time. The realm is in chaos, and chaos can be an opportunity." He paused, recalling Elia's voice in his mind, the memory of his sister, slaughtered by the mountain, and the vow that had carried him to King's Landing in the first place. This war in the north, this alliance with House Stark's remnants, had become a second vow layered atop the first. By avenging the Red Wedding, he felt he also honored Elia's memory, punishing Tywin Lannister for every injustice. In the weeks that followed, the plan set into motion. Small groups of rebels slipped out of White Harbor, heading to coordinate with the Neck and the Umbers. Letters were smuggled to a few lesser houses who chafed under Bolton rule, hinting that a true Stark heir lived. The deserted fortress near the Bay of Seals, where Rickon Stark hid, received couriers from Glover. They offered to fortify it in secret, stockpiling grain and arms. If Rickon was old enough to wave the direwolf banner, that might be enough to spark hope. Meanwhile, Bolton raids escalated. Ramsay Bolton, infamous for his cruelty, burned suspected rebel villages, crucified or flayed men believed to harbor outlaws, and posted gruesome displays along the roads. Some frightened villagers turned on the rebels, giving them up to spare their families. The winter snows thickened, complicating travel for both sides. It became a war of ambushes and sabotage, a slow, grinding conflict where every yard of ground was paid for in blood. Oberyn led a few of these raids himself, pushing his battered body to its limits. His old injuries never fully healed, but in the frenzy of battle, he forgot the pain. Each time they struck a Bolton caravan, freed prisoners from a wagon, or destroyed a storehouse of stolen grain, Oberyn felt a grim satisfaction. The Red Viper had come to the north, and he would not depart quietly. Tyene's poisons wreaked havoc on Bolton outriders. A single arrow grazing a horse could bring it down in convulsions, sowing chaos among the riders. Nymeria's infiltration talents allowed them to slip behind enemy lines at night, cutting saddle straps and spooking the Boltons' mounts. Obara, once healed enough to swing a weapon with full strength, joined the Umbers in direct confrontations. She had no taste for stealth, only for the raw thrill of matching steel. White Harbor remained their anchor, each day Lord Wyman quietly funneling supplies out of the city gates. Through it all, Oberyn sent ravens to Dorne, uncertain how many messages reached Prince Doran or were intercepted by Lannister agents. He never received a direct reply, only the occasional coded letter from certain Dornish lords, hinting that the sands were shifting, that House Martell might soon reveal a bigger move. Still, Doran's reticence remained intact. Oberin understood his brother's nature. He would wait for the perfect moment, even if it meant letting Oberin wage a clandestine war on his own for months. As the season deepened, the nights grew long and cold. Snow blanketed the hillsides. The once green fields turned white under a sullen sky. Many roads became impassable for wagons, which worked to the rebels' advantage. The Boltons struggled to maintain supply lines. More northern houses, bitterly recalling the Red Wedding, began sending quiet support. The Flayed Man banner started to look more precarious, though it still flew over Winterfell, where Ramsay labored to restore the keep. In the gloom of those winter nights, Oberyn sometimes stood alone on the warehouse roof in White Harbor, staring up at the ghostly auroras that flickered across the northern horizon. He thought of Dorne's brilliant sun and scorching heat, a world away. Yet the bite of the northern wind felt like a needed lash across his soul. He had chosen this path, forging an alliance with the wolves of the north, an alliance sealed in blood by the Red Wedding. If all went well, the name Bolton would be cursed as widely as that of Gregor Clegane, and the Lannisters' hold on the north would unravel. He drew breath, recalling the day he had faced the mountain in single combat, how he had demanded a confession for Elia Martell's murder. He had nearly died for it, but fate had given him a second chance, nay, a third after the Red Wedding. Perhaps the gods were not done with him. Perhaps they demanded he stand here, bridging the gap between sun-scorched Dorne and snowbound Winterfell to carve out justice that the realm's lords had long denied. Below, in the alleyway, he spotted a few fisherfolk trudging home with nets slung over their shoulders. Even in winter, the sea was bountiful enough to sustain White Harbor. He watched them vanish around a corner, then turned his gaze toward the dark horizon where the rest of the north lay blanketed in cold. There, somewhere, Rickon Stark huddled by a fire with his direwolf, no more than a boy but carrying the entire weight of his house. The Boltons coiled like serpents around Winterfell, not realizing they themselves were being encircled by a different viper, one that wore a Dornish sun on his heart. Oberyn's jaw set. Soon, he thought. Soon, they would make their move. Let Tywin Lannister scowl on his high seat in King's Landing. Let the Freys clutch their illusions of supremacy. Let Roose and Ramsay build their dominion on bones and blood. The North remembered and Dorne remembered. The Red Viper of Dorne, battered and scarred, yet unbroken, was leading those memories north. He intended to see them fulfilled in steel and flame, however long it took. In the stillness of that rooftop vigil, he whispered a vow to the silent winter sky. I have survived death twice. I will not fail again. We will bring justice to the wolves, to Elia, to all the realms wronged. And if the realm cannot stand to face it, we will forge a new one in the ruins. Then he descended the stairs to join his daughters to plan the next strike to keep the flame of their cause alive. The snow fell upon White Harbor in silent drifts, but in the hearts of those who followed the Red Viper, a fierce heat smoldered, waiting for the moment when it would erupt and consume every last betrayer who had spilled innocent blood on that murderous wedding night.